Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadhyasya Yato Anvayaditaratascha Artheshu Abhigyaswarat Tene Brahmahridaya Adikavaye Muhyanti Yatsurayah Tejo Vari Mridam Yatha Vinimayo Yatra Sargo Mrisha Dhamna Swena Sada Nirastakuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi Nigamakalpataror Galitam Phalam Shukamukad Amritadrava Sanyutam Pibata Bhagavatam Rasamalayam Muhuraho Rasika Bhuvi Bhavukaha. So we now enter the 14th chapter of the 7th Skandha of Srimad Bhagavatam. We are in the middle of this discourse by Narada to Yudhishthira on Sanatana Dharma, which involves the four varnas and the four ashramas and the way of living. So Narada has described the essence of the four varnas and the four ashramas, concluding with the highest ideal of sannyasa. Now Yudhishthira asks a question specifically relating to him because he is a householder. He says, "O Devarishi Narada, please tell me the right course of conduct specifically for a householder like me, because householders tend to be easily, excessively attached to their household. So, what is the way for us to attain the highest state of beatitude?" So, Yudhishthira here again takes the position of a very humble householder. The reality is, Yudhishthira is a very elevated soul. He is completely surrendered to Krishna, and Krishna himself, that's why, blesses Yudhishthira and the Pandavas with his grace, coming to them all the time, helping them in so many ways. And yet Yudhishthira, out of his great humility, asks this question for the benefit of all of us. So when Yudhishthira asks this question, Narada responds very beautifully. This description of Narada is so perfect for a householder, the ideal way for a householder to live. Narada says, "O Yudhishthira, a householder has to stay in his house and perform all the duties for the life of a householder, whatever is due, and yet offer everything to the Supreme Lord Vasudeva without expecting any reward of any kind, any credit of any kind, and always glorify the sages." So, this is the first instruction, which in fact contains the essence of everything. Narada says, "Vasudeva Arpanam Sakshat Upasita Mahamuni." So, two things Narada says. One is Vasudeva Arpanam, surrender everything to the Supreme Being Vasudeva. And second is always wait upon, serve, and glorify the sages. Whoever comes to the house or comes to the town, serve them and take care of them. Mahamunin, great sages. So these two things are the primary duties of a householder. One is to do his duties properly and offer it completely to God, to Vasudeva. And two is always serve the sages. Now Narada goes into more detail. He says, the way to do this is, first of all, to have the association of those who are tranquil by nature, who are peaceful by nature. So that's extremely important, to have the right sangha. Satsangan, he says. Second is, he says, one has to listen whenever there is leisure time to the nectar-like stories of the avatars of the Lord. Because this attitude of what Narada said, of surrendering everything to the Lord and to serve the great sages, it doesn't come without the association with saintly beings, with those who are very peaceful, and also without listening to the stories and the teachings of the Lord. So Narada says, listen to the stories and the teachings of the Supreme Lord, the avatars, so such as Bhagavatam, and teachings such as Bhagavad Gita. Have the fellowship of saints, and by this gradually attachment to everything goes away. Attachment to the body as I, and attachment to one's relatives, children, wife, house as mine goes away. Everything is seen as belonging to God. The body belongs to God, the family belongs to God, everything belongs to God, and therefore everything is used only for service without any attachment. Narada says, Shunvan Bhagavato Abhikshanam Avatara Kathamritam. Such a beautiful expression. He says, one has to listen to the nectar, amritam, kathamritam of Bhagavato Avatara, the avatars of Bhagavan. Shraddhadano yata akulam. Whenever there is free time, he has to do that. Satsangat, and then the next is Satsanga. With these two, he can gradually be free of the attachment to the body as I, and the family and the house and possessions as mine. See everything as belonging to the Supreme Lord, and therefore engage everything in the service of the Lord, service of the great sages, and service of the whole of humanity and all living entities. So then Narada says, therefore, by serving his body and his household, one has to only engage in what is necessary and not excessively work for the welfare of the body or for the relatives or for the wealth or whatever. So Narada says one has to do what is necessary, of course. One cannot ignore the body, ignore the family, or ignore the house, but one also cannot excessively obsess with the body or obsess with the relations or obsess with the house, which is what is a trap for many householders. So Narada says just do what is necessary and inwardly remain detached. Outwardly, you can even behave like you are attached to anyone and anything, but inwardly remain detached and thereby move about among men as an ordinary person. So, this is a great secret Narada is saying. You don't have to demonstrate to everyone that you are very spiritual and you are very elevated or you are very holy and all this, which is only coming out of ego. All these ways of portraying oneself as elevated in some way or holy in some way. Narada says a truly humble being doesn't show anything outside. He simply inwardly remains detached. Outwardly, he seems like he is very engaged in all the activities, and yet he is only doing what is necessary to be done and not excessively work towards these kinds of goals. And then he also says, very beautiful practical advice he gives. Narada says, also, do not pick arguments with anyone. Just say yes to people as long as it doesn't have any real bearing on your inner sense. So Narada says, whether it's your relatives, parents, sons, brothers, wife, just simply say yes to them and do what they desire as long as it doesn't cause any fundamental obstacle to your inner life. Narada says, ज्ञातयः पितरौ पुत्रा भ्रातरः सुहृदो अपरे यद्वदन्ति यदिच्छन्ति च अनुमोदेत निर्ममः. Simply Narada says, whatever they say, yadvadanti, yadichanti, whatever they desire, simply say yes to that and do it without any sense of ego or mind. So this is such a practical advice Narada gives for living without conflict in a household, where not picking arguments, not having any conflicts, but simply as much as possible avoid conflict by saying yes to people and doing what is necessary. And Narada says, by doing so, a wise man can engage all the wealth, all the resources in the service of the Supreme Lord, recognizing that everything comes from the Lord. It's all the energy of the Supreme Being. It's Prakriti that is manifest as the body, as people around, as the various materials around, and the people's essence, of course, is the Supreme Spirit itself. So, all that is matter, which is both material things such as wealth and house and so on, and the physical aspects of one's own body or the others' bodies and others' thoughts, one's own thoughts, all these belong to the material energy of the Lord, and the essence of the living entity, one's own self, and the self of every one in the household and everyone is the pure spirit. So, recognizing this, Narada says, one can therefore engage everything in the service of the Supreme Being, Achyuta. Another beautiful name that is often used in Bhagavatam. Achyuta means the one who is always perfect, infallible, Supreme Lord. And therefore, Narada says, Also, another practical instruction is do not accumulate more than what is necessary for the well being of the health of one's own family. So, whatever is necessary for the body and the soul to be together, that alone is the rightful due of a living entity. Narada, here it's a very important instruction. Narada says, do not hoard wealth beyond what is necessary for the body and soul to be together in a healthy way. So, having a good provision for eating healthily, having a simple abode, clothes, it's okay. But if one accumulates beyond all reasonable means for even generations to come, then Narada very bluntly says he is a thief and deserves punishment. Narada doesn't mince any words. He says, Adikam yo abhimanyeta sasteno dandamarhati. Dandamarhati means he deserves punishment. He says, one who acquires more than what is necessary, he is a thief and deserves punishment. Therefore, one has to be very careful in not hoarding wealth either and making sure that one gives away. So, Narada says that's why one should look upon all the animals and all the living entities as part of one's own being, because as we said, everything belongs to the Supreme Lord, and the spirit, which is our own self, is essentially the Supreme Lord. Therefore, that which is conscious is the Supreme Lord, and that which is matter is the energy of the Supreme Lord, and that's all there is. Seeing this, and therefore being free of I and mine, Narada says one has to use any excess wealth to feed animals, feed children, feed other living entities, and thereby not be caught in this trap of hoarding wealth and getting attached to it. So, Narada says one should not, as a householder, also focus on dharma, artha, or kama, because they are only meant to be kept to a limit. So, one can focus on dharma to only up to a limit. Dharma is the practice of virtue, artha is wealth, and kama is sensual enjoyment. All of this are completely not necessary for other stages of life, because especially for a recluse or for a sannyasi, the only focus is on the highest moksha dharma, or even beyond that, pure surrender. Whereas for a householder, a little bit of wealth, a little bit of sensual needs are allowed, but Narada says that has to also be kept within limit, and the primary focus even for him has to be to surrender to the Supreme Lord, because that brings forth a conflict free householder life. It is not to think of it as some kind of sacrifice, though the word sacrifice itself is a beautiful word in that it means making something sacred. So it's not in the sense of denying one anything, but actually giving one everything. Because if we live in this spirit of unconditional love without the sense of I and mine, and therefore free of conflicts, then the household life is also enriched. There is no conflict with one's relations, with one's children, with one's spouse. There is no conflict with wealth. There is no conflict at work. Everything is put in its proper place, and there is peace all around. And such a life of peace and joy is a life of plenty. That is the true life of plenty, and not a life where one's bank account is swelling, but there is no inner peace and joy. So Narada gives the way for a householder to live with inner peace and joy without denying anything, just taking what is necessary, and yet living a life of true inner plenty. And therefore, Narada says one should unsparingly divide whatever wealth excess he has to all the strata of society, anyone who deserves help at any level, they should all be given whatever one can give out of one's strength, yatha balam. And therefore, one has to accept what is assigned to one, and first of all be content with what one gets. And if one is getting more than what is necessary, then be very generous in sharing it with society, and thereby one can truly remain free. And so Narada says the Lord who cannot be easily conquered is very easily conquered by one who has no sense of attachment as I and mine with respect to his own body or his wife or his wealth or anything. So this is the beautiful secret Narada gives. The Lord is normally called Ajita. Ajita means one who can never be conquered, and yet the only way to conquer the Lord is through love, it is said. And that comes about only when there is complete freedom from ego. So Narada says, the Lord who is unconquerable is in reality conquered only through unconditional love. And that unconditional love comes about when one gives up attachment completely to everything that one thinks it belongs to him. So whether it be the body or whether the wife or whether the children or parents or family, treat everything as God's property, God's own, because every living entity is in essence the same Supreme Spirit, a manifestation of the Supreme Spirit, and every aspect of physical manifestation is the energy of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, recognizing this and not seeing any difference, seeing that it is the same Supreme Being situated in the hearts of all living entities, and it is the same material energy that is functioning as the body and the mind of all living entities. And therefore, with the vision of sameness, Samadarshana, one can easily conquer the Lord, Narada says. Because he says that the true vision is to see that the body ultimately is only going to be destroyed, and therefore attachment to body, which is the root of all attachment, can be seen as completely false, because Narada says very explicitly that what is the state of the body? It either becomes worms or it becomes ashes, whether it's buried or cremated, and that is the truth of one's own body, one's spouse's body, one's children's body, everything, everyone's body is simply that. So if we consider one's body as dear or the body of the spouse or the children as dear, one can see, as Narada points out, that they are simply of the inevitable fate of becoming worms or becoming ashes. So what we love is not the body but the spirit. And the spirit is the same whether it be in oneself or within anyone else. And therefore, if one sees no distinction, then one can act with responsibility without attachment. So the secret that Narada gives is one's responsibility is towards one's household, but one's love is towards the entire creation. And therefore, one can take care of one's body, one can take care of one's relations, and whatever is excess, one can distribute it and inwardly have the view of sameness towards all. This is the secret of a householder life. And therefore, Narada says one can live with whatever articles one obtains, one can give it to the fivefold sacrifices, Narada says, which are very important. Narada says there are five debts one has. One is to the animal kingdom, second is to all the humans, third is to our forefathers, fourth is to the sages, and fifth is to the various aspects of nature. Because all these five essentially is what sustains life. Without that, we cannot live. So it's all the various animals, whether it's the ants or the bees, all the way up to the cows, they all provide for our life. Then other humans, every human being contributes for a plate of food. Some farmer works somewhere, someone trucks it from one village to another, and so many people's labor is involved in getting our food. The forefathers, the Pitrus, without them one cannot be here. Every father and mother make a lot of sacrifice for their children, and that's how we are here. The rishis, which is the fourth, they are the sages who give us all this wisdom, without which we cannot be able to recognize the truth of our own being. The rishis point us the way in order to engage in true inquiry and thereby surrender. And finally, the elements of nature, which are the devatas, which of course sustain the whole universe, whether it be the five elements, whether it be the rivers, the mountains, the oceans, the planets, all of them. And all of these, Narada beautifully says, one has to see as essentially having as their inner controller the supreme being Purusha. So this is the oneness that one has to see. Narada says the Purusha, which is the supreme being, is the inner controller of everything we just mentioned. All the animal beings, animal kingdom, that is, living beings, animals, birds, everything that's part of nature that contributes to our life, their inner controller, their inner spirit, all the human beings, their inner spirit, all our forefathers, their inner spirit, all our ancestors, that is forefathers, and then all the rishis, and finally all aspects of nature. Everything is controlled by the Supreme Spirit. Everything comes out of the Supreme Spirit. So while honoring the debt to these five, that is all living entities, humans, forefathers, rishis, and nature, and yet recognizing the one source of all the five as the Purusha, as the Supreme Being, and recognizing that he is the true controller and enjoyer of all sacrifices, of all actions, of all charity, of every activity, thereby recognizing this one source and honoring him is the way to live a ideal householder life. Because as we saw even in the second skandha of Bhagavatam onward, the beautiful description of the cosmic being of the Lord is given. So the cosmic being, the Purusha, is the universal form, which is essentially a beautiful vision that the whole universe is the body of the Supreme Spirit, Virat Rupa. And therefore, as Virat Rupa, Bhagavan is the body of the whole universe, and therefore, all the elements are part of this one universal body. All the mains, as we said, all the forefathers, all the animals, all the human beings, all the rishis, all aspects of nature, everything belongs to the cosmic being, and therefore he is alone the true doer and the enjoyer as the cosmic being. By recognizing this, and therefore not being attached to anything as mine or me, not considering that I am doing the actions or not considering that I am enjoying the results, offering the doership and the results, the rewards to the Supreme Being, one can act freely, is what Narada says. And then one important instruction Narada gives is the aspect of honoring the sages, which is very important. All the sages, all the people of the true wise class of beings called as Brahmanas, and those who are truly dedicated to self-realization. So as we already described in the one of the previous skandhas, previous chapters, where Narada beautifully described the true essence of the Varnas, he described who a true Brahmana is, and to such a Brahmana, not one simply who claims by birth, to such true Brahmanas, Narada says, the householders have to honor them and offer them with respect and take care of them, because the true Brahmanas do not take care of themselves. They don't have any wealth, they don't have any property. They are only engaged in God realization and in spreading this wisdom to the society. And therefore, that is important. And then the other aspect is, Narada says, one has to also honor the forefathers. There he gives some detailed description. In fact, very coincidentally, again, by a divine arrangement, we are in this particular fortnight which is called the Mahalaya Paksha. And Narada specifically speaks about this fortnight we are in right now. It can only be a wonderful divine arrangement again that this chapter comes now, because Mahalaya Paksha is the fortnight, the 15 days, that is, from the full moon that comes in this month till the new moon, which is coming in another 2 weeks. So this period of about 15 days, which comes in the fall every year, is considered extremely auspicious for honoring the forefathers. It is called as Mahalaya Paksha. And during this Mahalaya Paksha, one is supposed to do what is called a Shraddha, which is the ceremony to honor the ancestors, and especially the new moon day is called as the Mahalaya Sarvapitru Paksha. That is, it is the day when all the forefathers are honored. So if one doesn't do anything throughout the year, it is said that the coming new moon day of Mahalaya is the time to honor all the forefathers. And Narada very beautifully speaks of the exact fortnight we are in right now. He says one has to engage in Shraddha during this fortnight, this 15 days of Mahalaya Paksha, and honor the forefathers, because one has a debt to all the forefathers who have been the reason why we have got this body here. And so Narada also describes the various time periods when one has to do Shraddha in addition to this Mahalaya Paksha, which involves days such as new moon day and eclipses and specific days of the lunar calendar and so on. But the most important thing is, Narada says, one has to engage in not only honoring the forefathers through the Shraddha ceremony, but one has to also be very virtuous in engaging with everyone, especially during these times. So Narada says one has to engage in purifying oneself physically through snan, that is through through taking bath, and through, if possible, dipping in rivers, and through doing sacred vows, and through giving gifts to whoever one can gift. All of these acts are very important, and they have to be done along with the ceremony called Shraddha. So the essence of what Narada says here is, it is not simply enough to mechanically do any ceremony, but one has to have his heart in place and give generously to those who officiate in these ceremonies. And also, any gift one can give during this period is considered very good. So that's the other additional aspect of what Narada is saying here. And then, as far as places, also Narada gives specific beautiful instructions that there are many holy places the householders can visit, because these holy places are sanctified by the great beings. The great beings, sages, and Bhagavatas have glorified and have sanctified many holy places. It is said in Bhagavatam itself, we saw Tirtham Kurvanti Tirthani. They are the ones who make the sacred places into sacred places. And so such sacred places are great energy centers, and one can visit them. So Narada lists a bunch of them here, starting with wherever Ganga flows. The river Ganga is so sacred. He says, wherever Hari is worshipped and wherever Ganga flows, first of all, that is sacred. Yatra yatra Harer Archa Sadeshaha Shreyasampadam. Wherever Hari is worshipped, that's great. Yatra Gangadayo Nadyaha Puraneshu Cha Vishrutaha. Ganga and other sacred rivers, wherever they flow, that is sacred. Then he also mentions many holy places which are in different parts of Bharat, such as Pushkar, Kurukshetra, Gaya, Prayag, which is the confluence of Ganga and Yamuna, Prayagraj, Salagrama Kshetra, which is in Nepal, by the Kantaki river, where the Salagram stones are found, the sacred Salagram stones, and Naimisharanya, and Kanyakumari in the south, Rameshwaram, where Sri Ram, with the help of the Vanara Sena, built a beautiful bridge to go to Lanka, Prabhas, which is where Somnath is in Gujarat, Dwaraka, Varanasi, Mathura, Pampa, which is a lake in the south, Badrinath, Alaknanda River, Chitrakoot, where Ram and Sita and Lakshman spent a big portion of their Vanvas, forest dwelling time, Mahendra Parvat, which is the mountain in the south, from where Hanuman leaped to Lanka. So, all these holy places, and then he concludes by saying, any place that is consecrated with the temple of Sri Hari is a holy tract, and therefore any such place is a sacred place to live in and to visit and to offer obeisance to. So Narada lists all these places, and then he concludes by saying, all the seers conclude that Sri Hari is the source of everything, and therefore one has to, no matter what one does, see, because Narada has mentioned many things here, and he doesn't want Yudhishthira. Of course, Yudhishthira doesn't even need this instruction, it's for us. He doesn't want us to lose sight of the fact that everything is rooted in the Supreme Lord. So we can do all the sacred places, we can visit the various sacred places. And before that, Narada gave all these instructions on Mahalaya Paksha, how to honor the forefathers. And before that, Narada spoke about how to honor the great sages, the true Brahmanas. And then he spoke about doing charity to other living entities, taking care of animals. Everything is so important to live a truly religious life. And yet, all of this is complete when only one again recognizes that everything is going to the Supreme Lord. So, if we water a tree, then all the branches are taken care. So, all these are like various branches of the tree, and the root of the tree is the Supreme Lord. So, if we recognize that the Supreme Lord is the root and we are honoring Him, so we are not taking these as distinct entities who are independent, but we are only seeing everyone, all the great Brahmanas, all the great sages, all the forefathers, all elements of nature, all sacred places. Everything is an opportunity to connect to the root, connect to the source. They are all different manifestations of the one source, and they are all visible representations of Sri Hari. So that is the attitude with which we have to approach them, and therefore Narada says one has to, as all the sages, all the seers have said, it is Sri Hari and Hari alone by whom the whole creation is constituted. He says, Patram Twatra Niruktam Vai Kavibihi Patravittamaihi Harir Eva Eka Urvisha Yanmayam Vai Characharam. Harir Eva Eka, only Hari, the Supreme Lord, pervades the entire creation. This has to be very clear as we engage in any acts of charity, any acts of sacrifice, and so on. And so Narada says this can be seen easily by the fact that he is addressing Yudhishthira when Yudhishthira conducted the great Rajasuya sacrifice, and all the great sages came, Sanaka and the three brothers who are the great sages came, and many great yogis came, many great jnanis came, and yet all of them, they saw Sri Krishna attending the sacrifice and they gave the first respect to Krishna. So Narada says there is nothing more you need to know than this fact that in the very sacrifice you have conducted, everyone offered their first respect to Sri Krishna, who is the supreme avatar of the Supreme Being. And therefore, you have to recognize that the great tree that is in the shape of the universe is crowded with infinite number of entities, living entities and material energy, and yet the root of this tree is Sri Krishna. It's such a beautiful way Narada summarizes. There can be, even in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna refers to this whole creation as a tree, Ashwatthaменam Suviruda Moolam. He says this whole universe is like a banyan tree, like a giant banyan tree. And Narada here beautifully says the entire banyan tree has as its root Sri Krishna or the Supreme Lord. So if you recognize this, then you can serve the entire tree by simply serving Krishna, the Supreme Being, dwelling in the hearts of every living entity. So Narada says all the dwellings in the forms of human beings, animals, rishis, devatas are all having him as their inner controller, as their inner center, and you can perceive him in everyone. That being said, Narada also adds an important instruction that he is perceived more depending upon the elevated consciousness of the living entity. So that's why Narada says a human being is a greater manifestation of divinity than the subhuman animal species. So one has to be very clear. Sometimes people get carried away. For example, in honoring animals, one cannot put them above even humans, because humans are a greater manifestation of the reflection of the consciousness, that is the pure consciousness that is there in all living entities. is reflected more clearly in a human being than in the lower forms of animal entities. And even among human beings, those who are surrendered, those who are sages, those who are jnanis, those who are bhaktas, bhagavatas, they reflect it most clearly, and therefore they have to be honored above the ordinary human being. So Narada says, while everyone has the same Supreme Lord as the inner controller, he is manifested in different degrees of clarity in different entities, because it is like the same mirror, depending on the level of dust in the mirror, to that extent the mirror is not seen clearly. It is the same mirror, and similarly the mirror of the heart has dust at different levels in different living entities, and even among humans in different types of humans. And therefore the one whose mirror is very clear, and therefore the Supreme Spirit shines through, resplendent, is to be accorded the highest respect. Humans in general have a greater capacity to let the mirror shine through, and therefore they have to be given more respect than the animals, and so on. And yet recognizing that it's the same pure mirror of the heart that is shining within all entities. And therefore Narada says, to conclude this chapter, everyone honors the pure sages because they, as we said, have the clearest, that is to say, completely no dust, and without any dust in their heart, the pure spirit in the heart shines through, and therefore they have to be accorded the highest respect among all the various entities that Narada has listed in this chapter. And he concludes by saying, this is why Sri Krishna himself, to set an example, he always glorifies the lotus feet of the great Brahmanas. So we see this in the avatar of Krishna, where Krishna, with great love, even washes the feet of the sages and glorifies them, because he sets the example that those who have committed their life to Bhagavan, and those who are therefore pure in heart, and therefore those who reflect God clearly, are to be accorded the highest respect by society and by householders in particular. And by living householder life in this way, one can live an ideal householder life full of peace, love, no conflict, and true joy and true inner plenty. With this, Narada concludes this chapter. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.